All right, well, let's get rolling. I want to thank you all for joining us for this month's Alley Talks. Each month, we get together online to learn about a variety of topics related to accessibility. Please remember to follow us on Twitter. We are Alley Talks, or capital A11yTalks, to keep apprised of any upcoming sessions, speakers, or relevant information. Please keep in mind as you're presenting as well, but asking questions and talking later on in the program. This session is being recorded, including its chats. Everything will be available later on YouTube and captions, so don't worry, you won't have to miss a beat. Today, we are lucky enough to have with us Kara Gaulrapp of the Message Agency. She comes to us with more than the experience of having received an educational advertising award or as a front-end developer. She comes to us as a professional dedicated to web accessibility, digital literacy, and human-readable information. Today, she's going to be walking us through creating an inclusive digital presence. And for that, Kara, are you ready to roll?
I sure am.
Wonderful. Then let me hide myself, and it's all yours.
Okay, great. All right, hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Today's talk is going to be called Inclusive Digital Projects, Why Web Accessibility Matters. So a little bit of background about me. My name is Kara Gaulrapp, and I am a front-end developer at Message Agency, where I oversee our web accessibility initiatives. So Message Agency is a full-service digital agency in Philadelphia. Just to give a little background about us, we're a certified B Corporation, and we work a lot with nonprofits, universities, foundations, governments, and other mission-aligned organizations. We're a social enterprise that helps nonprofits use technology to enlighten, educate, engage, and enact change. So for the last 10 years, I've worked primarily in the education technology space. In the past, I've developed digital literacy curriculum for students with learning disabilities and designed a learning platform that focused on adult literacy and English language learning. With a personal mission to create an inclusive web, I'm an accessibility advocate, and I'm here today to help you guys fight this good fight as well. So I'd like to give you guys a little bit of an outline of today's session. It's broken up into questions that by the end of this presentation, we'll all have the answers to. We'll start by going over what exactly is web accessibility, where it started, who governs it, and other background information to level set ourselves. Next, we'll be going into why we should care about web accessibility, both in a humanitarian and business sense. Then we'll talk about what you guys can start doing today, right now, to start making your projects more accessible. And we'll also go over different tools and strategies that you can implement at every stage at your project and also bring back to your team members. And before we get into our Q&A portion, we'll talk about what tactics you can start using and continue to make your web accessibility a priority in your project. So in our physical world, we understand why we have things like ramps to buildings and cutouts at sidewalk crossings. We understand why signs have braille and why doors have push plates. It's to provide access to areas, information, and functionality that any given person may need. Web accessibility is an extension of those considerations. It's a set of best practices and guidelines that reduce or removes the barrier to entry. And it's also used to ensure that all users have equal access to this information and functionality. So where do these standards come from? So they come from the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, which is led by the inventor of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee. And he has this great quote that I particularly love. The W3C, for those of you who don't know, is an international organization that sets protocols and guidelines for ensuring long-term growth of the web. So his quote is, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." So inside the W3C is the Web Accessibility Initiative, which published the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 1.1, or WCAG for short, in 1999. In 2008, they published 2.0 and then recently published 2.1, which is now considered the standards. So these guidelines have been around for 20 years, and that's a very, very long time, especially in internet years. But what are they? So the WCAG divides its guidelines into 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, or POUR for short. I'll be giving a brief overview of these principles, as well as calling out some new additions from the WCAG 2.1. Hold on one second, please. There we go. So, perceivable. Information and user interface components must be presentable to users in every way that they can perceive. So nothing can be invisible to all of a user's senses. So, whether it's their physical senses or devices such as a screen reader, users must be able to get to your information in some way. Even in our language, the way that our content is written, we should remove reliance on shape, location, color, sound to navigate. So an example of that would be, oh, see the highlighted text at the bottom of this page. For users who can't see or are using different devices, they might not be able to understand that, or they won't be able to find that information if they're not visually presented with it. So we also want to make sure that we have text equivalents, captions, and transcripts for all of our information on our site. So if it's not text, you must add some text that gives your users the same information. So that means if you have videos, things like closed captioning, even if you have live videos, real-time captions, audio descriptions for certain videos, if what's on screen means something, and it would definitely give more context to the users. And then also transcripts for users who either can't hear, or if, let's say that they're listening to something at work but can't put the audio on. Also things like infographics and flowcharts. These types of visuals typically hold lots of information, so we need to have the what's called a long description. At the end of this presentation, I list a great resource for getting started making text equivalents of these. So this principle is also where where color contrast comes into play. From our text and even our icons, all elements on our page need to have a strong contrast. This makes content easier to read, not just for low vision users or colorblind folks, but elderly users and people, let's say, using their phones in direct sunlight. And also flexible design. With WCAG 2.1, a strong focus on mobile devices and users with cognitive disabilities was introduced. So things like making sure that websites are functional in all orientations and at all screen sizes, and even allow for content and functionality to still be available when certain text properties are changed. So the next one on our list is operable. This means that users must be able to operate the interface, and that interface cannot require interaction that a user cannot perform. Our devices allow us to interact with them in a plethora of ways, especially when we attach different accessories, like, let's say, a stylus, or connect input devices like a keyboard to them. And websites should allow for us and our users to switch between these modalities and mechanisms. Like, for example, if you have a form on your website and I am filling out the form by a voice input, I should be able to turn that feature off and continue filling out that form with a keyboard and a mouse instead. You also must make sure that that a user can use the website and perform all of its functionality with a keyboard. With the WCAG 2.1, some more guidelines came out about this, particularly around keyboard shortcuts. So let's say your web app or your website has, you use web key shortcuts. They must be able to be turned off or remapped, or only active when the element has focus. We also want to make sure that our websites have meaningful focus order, and we want to make sure that our elements have the focus visible. If you guys don't know what I mean by focus, it's typically seen as the little blue halo or outline around certain elements when you're going through a website. So when I'm tabbing through your website, the order in which elements receive focus should be logical, and that if I'm, to go back to a form example, if the form visually goes, name, address, and some, and then other ones, I shouldn't be, if I'm tabbing through, jumping around through those things. Also, another thing that came out with the WCAG 2.1 is that if a function on your website uses either a multi-point or other complex gesture, there must be a single pointer equivalent, like a single mouse click or single tap. So another thing is having multiple ways to access and find pages, like a sitemap. We need to also have ways for users to determine where they are and use it. And for people who put a lot of content on websites, we want to make sure that we're using the right heading levels and making sure that pages have titles. Assistive technologies use things like heading levels to help users navigate through a page. And then we want to give people controls over animation, auto-updating, or moving content. This helps users who have vestibular disorders or inner ear disorders, folks with epilepsy, and those who find moving content distraction, let's say certain cognitive disabilities. We want to give people a way to either stop this or give them another way to interact with this content. We also want to make sure that we're giving enough time for actions. So I'm not sure if you guys have ever, bought a ticket on like Ticketmaster and you have about 8 minutes to get through it or else your ticket is given to somebody else. We want to make sure that we're not doing that, or if we are, we give them 20 hours before that time's out. People who have cognitive disabilities might need more time to process not only what's being asked of them, but how to appropriately and correctly respond to what's asked of them. So next up is understandable. This means that users must be able to understand information as well as the operation of the user interface, and that content or operation cannot be beyond their understanding. So things like making sure that we're naming the language of our page and the language of the parts of our page. One thing that I found out that was very interesting is the idea around abbreviations. So working in tech, we deal with a lot of abbreviations, but there's a special markup that you can put when you're actually writing for it for the web. So a screen reader, for instance, might pronounce Xmas as SMAS. So making sure that we're marking up our abbreviations helps cut down on those kind of disconnects for screen readers and other assistive technologies. Things like reading levels also, falls under this and is also very important. So we also don't want any surprises from interactions. Users shouldn't be asking like, oh, what does this button do? Or how do I undo what I just did? It confuses users, and for certain users, it creates a barrier. We also want to make sure that when an element has focus, it doesn't trigger any major changes, whether it's of content or context, or let's say if I select this, I think I'm going to be selecting a different value for a dropdown, but really it's opening a new window because it's a jump link. Providing text around that or directions or instructions around it helps users to anticipate what an action on your site is going to cause. So we also want to, and going into that, we also want to give, clear instructions and definitions of elements, but especially around errors. Users, just provide, if somebody doesn't fill out a form correctly, just highlighting the box in red for somebody who, let's say, has low vision or is using an assistive technology, that doesn't communicate anything to them. So making sure that we have clear error messaging is very important. So it alerts these assistive technologies. We also want to make sure that we have consistent navigation and naming of things. We don't want our navigation menus like hopping around different places on a page, like when you go across sections of a website. And we also want to make sure that our elements are named consistently. So if you have a search box on one page and the button says search, on another page that button shouldn't say find. Next up is robust. So for this one, content must be well-formed enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including and especially assistive technologies. This also means that users must be able to access the content as technologies advance. So we want our sites to be backwards compatible and future-proof. So obviously you want to prioritize the present and avoid hacks. And you can use things like the W3C markup validation service to make sure that your HTML has no errors. Simple things like this help us future-proof our projects and cut down on lots of errors that can occur, as browsers and other technologies advance. Also, components' names, roles, states, properties, and values must be available to all assistive technologies. So if you develop your own interface components, you must make these different attributes available for your users' browsers. That should make them almost as accessible as standard HTML elements such as links, buttons, and checkboxes. Going back to a little bit of the error messaging, assistive technologies must be alerted to status messaging, but in a way that we're not interrupting a user. You can use things like I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with the ARIA live regions, but it's a way to have if there's a change in context in the page, or let's say if there's an error with something that somebody was doing, it'll alert the assistive technology and actually read aloud to the user that there was a problem, this is the error, and how you can fix it. So I'm assuming if you guys are here, you care about web accessibility, but why should you care? We all know that it's the right thing to do, and as project managers, designers, and developers, we're gatekeepers, and it's our responsibility to not gate people off and to make sure that every aspect of a web project can be accessed by anybody, regardless of limitation. In our physical world, if a blind person came up to you and asked you a question, you wouldn't say, "Oh, sorry, there's no room in the budget for me to share that with you, maybe in phase 2. So why would we block these users from accessing content or functionality in our digital world? When we don't plan for creating accessible products and integrate ways for our sites to be used by all, we're undervaluing people based on things that are out of their control. And we absolutely do not have the right to do that. So we all know that, that web accessibility is the right thing, but doing the right thing can't always convince people, unfortunately. But luckily, there's plenty of business cases that you can make for implementing an accessible product. So first on our list is the idea that when you solve for one, you're enhancing the experience for all. For instance, you may not have a vision limitation, but if the text on a website has proper color contrast, that benefits users with color blindness. And also on a sunny day when you're looking at your phone and the sun is glaring on it, you'll be able to see that text better. On the same token, having a healthy amount of line spacing and a sans serif font and a larger font size on our body copy not only helps people with dyslexia, but it helps older folks not have to zoom in so much to read certain content. Next on this list is the digital divide. Did you guys know that 10% of Americans lack high-speed internet? And this number particularly affects low-income people. When we conflate our sites with these insane animations and upload 3 megabyte images into the WYSIWYG, we're creating a barrier to entry for this population. And things like compression benefit everyone. I know I love it when my websites load in under a second. And also in the next couple of years, we're going to be seeing a whole lot of first-time internet users. So for my numbers people, I got some stats for you. By 2020, 1.1 billion people worldwide are going to be accessing the internet for the first time, and 23 million people of those are in America alone. That is a whole lot of people. And I've been on the internet since I was about 5 years old, and I make websites for a living. So suffice to say that I can navigate my way through some atrocious information architecture or pick up on user interface patterns fairly quickly. But a lot of people aren't that tech savvy, and a lot of people don't work in tech or have been around the internet for this long. So we want to make sure that we're using patterns that are intuitive, and if we're not, we have instructions for those, for things like filling out forms are clear and apparent. If our functionality differentiates from common practices, we need to make sure that we offer information that can guide users to better use our interfaces. We also don't want to make sure that or rather, we also want to make sure that we offer a way to undo or back out of tasks so users don't get stuck in a place where they don't know what to do. Because if these people haven't been around the internet for a while and this might be one of their first interactions with it, we want to make sure that this isn't an anxiety-inducing experience for them. So we also can't anticipate the reading levels and the fluency of our users. The WCAG says that we should write our content to a 6th grade reading level, and things like chunking information and writing in a clear, concise language helps this population digest your information easier. Even using icons for certain form fields could be beneficial in this area. So also, if your content uses a lot of words or terms that the average person may not know, and especially a user who isn't completely fluent in English, consider using putting a glossary of terms on your site somewhere. So from a technical standpoint, we're reducing development and maintenance times. Since we're building websites against best practices, our clean code means less support tickets about Internet Explorer and solving for one-off devices. It also makes doing a site redesign much, much easier. So for reducing bandwidth use and server load, we can talk about compression. When we pay close attention to how large our websites are and make an active effort to reduce its size, we don't need to worry as much about load times and how many times our server is being asked to transfer data. From a technical standpoint, device independence is also a huge thing. There's thousands of them out there, and we can't anticipate them all. When we use correct semantic markup, it helps our users who are using older technologies still be able to use our products, and it ensures that our products will continue to work with the latest and greatest. And this also helps with, we want to make sure that our sites work just as well on a, let's say, an iPhone X as it does on a low-cost device. So forward migration and backwards compatibility. The average lifespan of a website can be about 3 to 5 years. At Message Agency, we try for 7 to 10. But if you've ever had to migrate content from an old system, you know what a headache that can be. By keeping our code and structure clean, we can make that process a whole lot easier. So financial. By making our websites accessible, we're actually increasing our market segments. 15% of the world has some form of disability, and if we add that to the number of first-time internet users, which was 1.1 billion, that's a whole lot of people that we could potentially be ignoring. And to go back to page speed a little bit, you can anticipate that any person would use your site more. Google has said that just an extra half second of load time in a search page generation would cause traffic to drop by 20%. And Amazon says that 1 second of load lag time would cost them $1.6 billion in sales per year. That is an insane amount of money for just 1 second of lag time. So search engine, this also helps, having a web accessible site is also helps search engine optimization a whole bunch. Google loves us when we have well-structured content. When the Googlebot can tell exactly what our pages are about, we rank higher. Using this correct semantic markup, a grade 6 reading level, and having alt text on images also helps us do that. For direct cost savings, all the things we talked about on our technical slide apply here, from server load and maintenance, and even the cost of translating content or redesigning a site is minimized. We're also decreasing our legal threat, which is potentially the biggest money saver of them all. So before I get into this slide, I'd like to preface this by saying I am not a lawyer. So please do not come to me with lawsuits because I am a front-end developer. But here is just a quick overview of some legal cases that you can make to your team why web accessibility is a great thing. So the Americans with Disability Act, signed into law in 1990, prevents discrimination against a group that has historically faced many barriers. The ADA makes it illegal in this country for any government or business to provide goods and services to the public that are not also accessible to people who have disabilities. In many situations, however, it can be challenging to establish just what is meant by accessible. So that's why the U.S. Department of Justice, or the DOJ, which enforces the ADA, lots of abbreviations here, has issued a supplemental advance notice of proposed rulemaking to incorporate web accessibility into these standards. At the current point in time, most laws like Section 508 and various international laws only require your site to be 2.0 compliant, but the WCAG recommends using the latest version, which is 2.1, just kind of as a little aside. So who's covered in all of this? A wide range of agencies and companies are covered under the ADA. This includes state and local governments, which are referred to Title II regulations, and what are termed public accommodations, which are essentially any business or nonprofit organization that serves the public. Title III covers a lot of ground, including restaurants, theaters, and schools, ensuring that individuals cannot be denied entry to these places or denied service by these companies solely based on a disability. This includes services that are provided through a website or other digital formats. Okay, so I recognize that was a lot of information to take in, and it might seem a little daunting to start, but here are some ways that you can start incorporating web accessibility into any stage of your product or project. So whether you're planning, you're in discovery and design, development, or content creation, there's a plethora of ways that you can incorporate this. So I'm not sure who here is a project manager or responsible for putting together scopes and budgets, but this slide is for you. When you're first planning out your project, be clear that accessibility is a requirement and that we're not building and we're not bolting on, but rather we're building in. Accessibility should be a requirement and that it is launch critical. It's imperative to, when we wait until QA to care about web accessibility, development slows down and we go over budget and the design might even need to change. It then seems like accessibility is a thing that's holding us up and is the problem, but in reality, it's actually a process problem. We also want to map out exactly what conformance level we're planning to achieve and use the WCAG checklist to help write the requirements or testing scripts based off of them. Be proactive and share these requirements across teams so everyone's on the same page and there's time to answer any questions or address any implementation challenges. This will also help you plan for what you're missing. As an example, if you have a lot of videos on your site that contain important information, you'll need to provide text equivalents of that either through captioning or transcripts. So having time to plan for that is very important. You may also find yourself in a position where you have to train content creators on making their content more accessible. Starting these conversations early will help keep your project and your machine well-oiled. So when we're thinking about accessibility in discovery and design, there's a few things that we can do to ensure that our designs and experiences are being inclusive to all users. So we have these notions, these types of design called universal and inclusive design. They are both human-centric approaches to design. And I highly recommend looking into these, or if you're a designer and don't know about these, looking into how you can use these types of design to make your designs and your experiences way more web accessible. So designing for accessibility comes with its challenges for sure, but good design and good designers tackle those challenges. And also having an accessible website does not mean you have an ugly website. So these universal designs and inclusive designs, they're empathetic approaches that put people first. Your designs will be stronger and more intuitive because of it. With accessibility, we consider things like vision, hearing, cognitive, and mobility limitations, but a human-centric design encompasses accessibility and takes things like location and gender, language, education, and age into consideration as well. It's the idea that whether out of circumstance, choice, or context, people are diverse. And as people use different approaches and tools to read and operate our interfaces, what the interface offers each user should be comparable in value, quality, and efficiency. We also want to create personas with limitations. For those of you For those of you who aren't familiar with personas, it's a way in the discovery process for you to actually put names and faces and traits and behaviors to users as a way to help you build experiences that are better tailored for them. So if we create a few that have a disability, whether it's permanent, like a user who is permanently blind, or temporary, like somebody who has a broken hand, we're making sure that our website's experience can be extended to as many people as possible. It's also a way to reinforce that, we're here to serve all users, not just ones that are able to, use our websites with the mouse. We also want to make sure that we're vetting our mockups and our wireframes, checking for things like color contrast, making sure that all form elements have labels, that we have like proper line spacing between text and all of those things. A little bit on the color contrast. An interesting fact that I recently learned about color vision deficiency is that people who suffer from depression, whether they're medicated or not, actually see color contrast not as well as those who don't have those types of conditions. There's a really interesting study that came out of the University of Freiburg that I recommend checking out because what they discovered was really, really interesting. So back to vetting the mockups, we can have carousels but we shouldn't autoplay it and we should put a pause button on it. We can have things like mega menus, but we need to put a skip navigation link in. And we also need to make sure that it's keyboard accessible. Many navigation bars leave keyboard users unable to access those drop-down menus. So checking for things like that when we're prototyping is completely essential. Also, things like infinite scrolling is really problematic, especially for users who are navigating by a keyboard or somebody using a screen reader because they can't get past the stream of refreshing content. So we need to give them abilities to turn off these features or replace it with a load more button. It's the same thing with animations and the really popular parallax effect that I see on a lot of websites. That can be really disorienting for certain users that have those inner ear disorders that we were talking about before. So we also need to obviously test. We need to know in advance that users are going to make mistakes and not use our tools the way that we think they will. So we need to test our products with all types of people. There's no use designing for empathy if you're not going to be looking for input and feedback from actual users that have this limitation. And then if there's any developers in here, this one's for you. While we're in development, we'll want to actively be checking the status of our accessibility using tools like the Wave extension, Google's dev tools to run accessibility audits, or one of my favorites, the command line tool Pally. These things can give you insight into how you can increase your compliance. I'm also a fan of the Site Improve extension that you can download on your browser. It groups the alerts and errors by responsibility, like for instance, like this is a content editor responsibility, or this is something that would be changed by a developer. It helps kind of section out those types of things and helps people like own certain aspects of this process. And then when we're creating our accessible website, we're using correct and meaningful semantic markup. This helps users who are using older technology still be able to use our products and ensures that our products will continue to work with the latest and greatest. We can also add the WAI ARIA roles where necessary. This stands for Web Accessibility Initiative Accessible Rich Internet Application. It allows us to add roles, properties, and state information to dynamic web applications. I think I had mentioned it before, but one of the new ARIA things that I've been experimenting with is its live region, since a lot of our searches on our website use AJAX. So what ARIA live region does is alert someone who is using a screen reader that there's a change in content or context. And just a quick note about when you are adding like ARIA attributes, that we don't want it to be redundant. A lot of HTML5 markup actually, it already tells screen readers like what it is. So if you add other ARIA properties, it's just redundant and ends up creating a little bit more of a barrier than you would think. So sometimes like adding more is a little too much, but it's just one of those things that depending on what it is, you just, test it, run it through an auditor and see what comes out to see if you have to take it out or not. We also want to make sure that we're paying close attention to how our site responds to different screen widths, orientations, and browsers, and make sure that all parts of a page are functional. With 2.1, it's a big win for people who design websites because it's basically saying your website must be responsive. So basically, a lot of people are using mobile devices now, so you really can't have like these like fixed width websites anymore, because it does create a barrier for a lot of people. We also want to use assistive technology as a way to go through our websites to see what we can fix. So whether it's tabbing through a website or using like a voiceover app, you might be able to pick up on things that you normally wouldn't. If you're an Apple user, your phones and computers actually come with a set of accessibility tools like their built-in screen reader voiceover. So, and then for those of you who control a site's content, you have a very, very important role. Working in an agency that manages many different websites, I'm not running an accessibility test on your site every day, but you might add content to your site every day. So if you do, and you happen to be on Drupal or a site that enables a CKE editor WYSIWYG, I highly recommend using their accessibility checker. If you don't have this installed on your site, ask your developers to enable this plugin. And here's a screenshot of it. All you have to is simply clicking the little accessibility button will not only highlight certain accessibility issues, but it'll oftentimes just automatically correct it. It'll also give you a reason why it's an error. For example, skipping a heading level, like going from an H1 to an H3 is a violation. In my experience, I've noticed a lot of times people will skip heading levels because they like the way an H3 tag looks more than an H2. So having this plugin installed is what I like to call a reinforcement layer because it explains why something is wrong. And also, people don't like alerts yelling at them, so I think it trains people a little bit. We also want to check our content's reading level. Like I had mentioned before, we really want to be aiming for a grade 6 reading level. And I highly recommend using the website hemingwayapp.com. This app is great because it highlights areas of improvement and how your content can be more readable. And I will say that they could use some icons in here. While I do love this app, they could use some icons in here because, as we learned, we shouldn't use color alone to indicate the state of something. But I actually, not just when I'm writing content, but even like for things like writing emails, I'll dump this in here just to see, I'm like, oh, well, I do have this really confusing run-on sentence. So it just helps make your language a lot more understandable. We also want to write meaningful links. Link text like read more or learn more mean nothing out of context. Like if you're listening on a screen reader and depending on how an element's marked up, it can be very confusing to users and they can be asking themselves like, learn more about what? So, and our accessibility checkers like the Wave extension and the other ones that I had mentioned before, they'll flag this as redundant links. So these strategies are great if you're in the position to be rebuilding or doing considerable development, but if you're in the position where you have to retrofit a website or make interim repairs before a site redesign, there are still things that you can do to help. The first is identifying if these things are things that you can either do in-house or if you need to contract a vendor for. If you don't have the in-house capacity to do these changes and deploy these changes, consider a vendor. You'll want to make sure that this, if you are doing a vendor, you want to make sure that they have a solid track record with working with clients in your specific industry and working with the technology that you're currently employing. And if you're going the DIY route, make sure that you have a clear set of expectations and milestones along with the timeline of how and when you can implement these changes. The next is auditing. Accessibility audits are a great way to identify where your site is lacking in accessible functionality. And a quick word about audits. An accessibility audit is a checklist of whether or not a site meets its organization's compliance success criterion. It's also a reference point for where a site is at a specific point in time and where it stands against compliance. And it is also a roadmap for future enhancements to better serve users with limitation. An audit is not the end-all be-all stamp of a great experience to an end user with a disability. While a site might pass all of its success criterion, it is highly encouraged to use actual assistive technologies and survey real users to see how you can make improvements and enhancements. All the tools out there, whether they're automated or manual, can only tell you so much. For instance, they can tell you that an image has alt text, but it can't tell you if it's meaningful. So a successful audit is done by an actual human with the aid and help of these tools. And also, audit is a scary word, but I promise you, auditing is not scary. You should think of it as a roadmap for how you can prioritize and execute your needed changes. I'll also list it at the end of this presentation, but the W3C has a phenomenal web accessibility evaluation report generator that I personally use, and it walks you through step-by-step of how to perform your own audit. And a little bit of like how often we want to be performing these audits. I recommend doing a full site audit probably about every like 6 to 12 months and mini audits of your most frequently used pages and tools every 1 to 3 months. And that's also along with any development change that is deployed to one of these pages. Just run a quick audit and see if anything changes on that page. It's just a way to keep up with it. So, when you are doing your mini audits or your yearly like full site audits, you're not just like, oh no, this like thing that like I pushed out like 7 months ago, like now I need to like rework this, and it becomes a whole mess. So just doing it like while you're working on it cuts out a lot of headaches. So, and lastly, communication. We can't anticipate how all users are going to be using our site. So having a page on our website that's easily findable, that maps out your commitment to web accessibility, the timeframes that you're working against, and offering a clear way for somebody to contact you about their frustrations. A lot of times when organizations have gotten sued over web accessibility, it's because the user has repeatedly reached out to that organization, and that organization either didn't properly handle the communication or just pushed it aside and didn't make a big deal about it. So having something on your website that says, hey, if you need something on this website and you can't find it, here's a person, here's their email address, here's a phone number for a way for you to contact them. So how do you get people to care? In a perfect world, doing the right thing is reason enough, but that's not the world that we live in. So to get buy-in, we're going to use the logical business cases that we talked about, and the statistics around website usage should drive our point home. We're also going to keep talking and keep asking questions. Be a constant reminder that we're here to serve all users. Don't be afraid to ask your designers why it takes a mouse user 1 click to get to an important area of the site, and why it takes a keyboard user's 10 tabs to get to the same place. We also want to share responsibility. It's best to get people across every team to be a part of this initiative. It's not solely the developer, designer, or project manager's responsibility to make sure we're meeting compliance. It's all of our responsibility. And remember, teamwork makes the dream work. So I'd like to now open this up for question time. If you guys have anything, feel free to type it in the chat, and I'm here to answer any questions that you guys may have.
And I'm also looking on Twitter to see if there is anything here. I don't see any questions there. Anybody have anything to add to the chat? I actually had one. Was the W3org test evaluate the correct link for the tool you referenced?
Let's see. I have going through I think it's in here. Well, if it's not, I'll surely be adding it right after this. But yeah, it comes right from the W3C. It's a great tool. It's basically what it does is it has you, write the name of the website, what conformance level that you're targeting, a list of all of the, what was that?
Is this the statement generator?
The statement generator? No, were you asking about the evaluation tool?
Yes. All right. I'm sorry. I got confused by what you were just saying.
Oh,
My
sorry.
bad, guys.
my apologies. Um, no, I was specifically talking about the evaluation tool. I personally use it in a lot of my audits because it's a way to just easily map things out and keep things organized as you're going through and doing an audit.
Awesome. All right. Oh, another question. Are there any simple next steps for someone who's starting out in accessibility, or does that really depend on their role?
I mean, it is depending, it can be dependent on your role, but really just becoming familiar with what the standards are and how you can pass it. And I will say that, going through the going through the WCAG and its language, it can be really hard to understand. So I highly recommend, checking out as many blogs as you can, because there are plenty of sites that break it down in a little bit more human readable format, because it's hard to parse through all that stuff. If you are and also like going to meetups, I feel like the accessibility community, we're very tight knit but very open. Lots of cities have different meetups. I went to, even though I'm a developer, I went to a web accessibility event here in Philadelphia that was for UX designers. So even if, even as like a developer, just knowing what designers or project managers, like how web accessibility would affect their role, it helps me anticipate some of their challenges and kind of helps like the communication keep going. So, read as much as you can, and even though certain things might help you more specifically in your role, having just very general and broad knowledge how it affects everyone, I think is incredibly invaluable.
Beautiful. And do you happen to have any recommended books or podcasts or blogs that you think we'd really value from?
Yes, I sure do. So I'm a big fan of the Adobe Accessibility blog. They have pretty good articles about it. Web accessibility that you can just check out. Also, I think it is 24 Ways. They're also another really good one. There's a lot of resources out there. I have a few of them listed here that, definitely make sure to check out. I have a web design references and how-to articles, some handy tools like text spacing bookmarklets, 10 for designers, like 10 principles for inclusive design. The US web design system is also a really interesting thing to check out. And then also the UK government's done a really awesome job at breaking out like their design systems and like web access and how they meet different web accessibility standards. So things like that I would highly recommend checking out.
Beautiful. All right, let me take one more peek here to see if we have any final questions. Otherwise, I think we're getting really close to all set. Just one final one. You mentioned how to sell things internally and all of that. What do you think is the best first step for somebody who's maybe finding some challenges, really getting an accessible culture started at their company?
I would say it's like a lot of times, unfortunately, people react better to like, kind of like those business cases. So really like speaking about how like this can save people money, depending on who you're talking to get like buy-in for at least like starting an initiative. Because it's like, if you go to your boss and you're like, hey, like, we should be better humans. Can we do this? Like sometimes they're like, maybe not. Like maybe you could do like a lunch and learn or something. But really like speaking to certain people's like, logical or like money-based senses work. But then, also I find just sharing things like sharing different like articles that you read. If you have like at your workplace, have a, Slack or HipChat, just randomly sending articles in there to get people thinking about it. One of the things that we did here was we started really with the lunch and learn. It was just during like lunch, and our whole staff like went in there, gave a little, basic presentation, and then just always being a reminder that, asking questions, being like a reminder to people that this is something that we care about. Like don't be afraid to ask your designers things. And it's like reminding, and if you're going over requirements with a project manager, be like, oh, well, why isn't accessibility like why isn't accessibility like a requirement in here? Why is it not a requirement that, we're not building in these types of functionalities for people who are using assistive technologies? You don't have to be like the accessibility police, but, but actually be the accessibility police if you have to be.
Wonderful. Let's see. Yes, Carrie wrote here in our chat, but I'll say it aloud. Thank you so much for speaking to our group today, Kara. We're going to be capturing this video, posting it on YouTube. Please, everyone, feel free to check back for our on our Twitter, check on our YouTube channel, and we'll definitely be able to go through and reread this or review this at a later time. Kara, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up today?
No, feel free. I'm in the Drupal group as Carrot. If you want to reach out to me, also please email me. I'm not super big into social media, so you'll have to start a conversation with me over email. But if you have any questions, like seriously, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm very passionate about this, and I want to make this as easy for as many people as I can. So I hope you guys learned something, and let's keep the conversation going.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who came. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.
Yes, have a great afternoon, guys.